My fiancé cheated with my best friend while I planned our future, so I vanished, took legal action, and left them begging for mercy. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my adult life, I believed loyalty and long-term planning were the foundation of real love. Not the flashy stuff. Not grand gestures for Instagram. I'm talking about showing up every day, making sacrifices quietly, and building something solid brick by brick. That's how I loved. That's how I planned my future. I met my fiancée 6 years ago, and from the start, she felt safe. Calm. Like someone who understood the rhythm of my life instead of trying to disrupt it. She'd sit with me during late nights while I worked, bring me coffee without asking, remind me to eat when I forgot. We talked about everything, where we'd live, how many kids we wanted, what kind of life felt meaningful. She knew my routines, my stress points, the version of me I didn't show to anyone else. I thought that kind of closeness meant trust. My best friend had been part of my life even longer. We grew up together. Same streets, same schools, same dumb teenage mistakes. He was the guy who slept on my floor when things went bad at home, the one I'd call without thinking twice. I trusted him like blood. There was never a moment where I questioned his intentions. He was just, always there. By the time we got engaged, I was deep in planning mode. I saved aggressively. Turned down trips. Picked up extra hours. I had spreadsheets for budgets, timelines for the wedding, mental notes about where we'd be in 5 years. I didn't talk about it much. I liked the idea of stability being something you build, not brag about. There were red flags, I guess. Late nights she brushed off as work stress. A slight emotional distance that crept in slowly, like fog. Changes in her behavior I told myself were normal as life got more serious. When my best friend started coming around more often, I didn't think twice. Why would I? At that point, I trusted both of them completely. I genuinely believed betrayal was something that happened to other people, people who ignored obvious signs, people who didn't know their partners, people who weren't careful. I thought I was different. I had no idea how wrong I was. Looking back, what scares me most isn't the betrayal itself, it's how quietly it started. Nothing exploded. Nothing felt dramatic. It was all small enough to excuse, subtle enough to normalize. And I did exactly that. After the engagement, things shifted in ways I couldn't quite explain. She started guarding her phone like it was fragile glass. If I walked into the room, the screen would go dark. Not in a panicked way, more casual, like muscle memory. When I asked who she was texting, she'd smile and say, "Just friends," or "group chat stuff," in that tone that sounded annoyed I even asked. Our conversations changed too. They became shorter. Less curious. I'd talk about work stress or future plans, and she'd nod, distracted, scrolling. When I asked how she was feeling, she'd shrug and say, "Just tired," like that explained everything. I told myself this was normal. Engagement stress. Adult life. Everyone says relationships get quieter once reality sets in. My best friend was around more than usual. Dropping by unannounced. Staying late. Sitting a little too close on the couch. They laughed together in a way that felt effortless. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. I remember walking into the kitchen once and hearing them abruptly stop talking. She laughed nervously and said, "We were just talking about wedding stuff." "Cool," I said, forcing a smile. I wanted to be the secure guy. The trusting fiancé. The friend who didn't read into things. One night, I mentioned how distant she'd been feeling. She sighed heavily, like I'd accused her of something unfair. "You're overthinking," she said. "Why are you trying to create problems where there aren't any?" That sentence stuck with me. It made me feel guilty. Paranoid. Like I was failing some unspoken test of trust. So I doubled down. I worked harder. Planned more. Loved quieter. I told myself real loyalty meant staying steady even when things felt off. I ignored the pit forming in my stomach every time she stayed out late and said she was with coworkers. I ignored how my best friend suddenly knew details about her day that she hadn't told me. At night, lying next to her while she slept facing away, I stared at the ceiling and reminded myself of everything we'd built. Of how long we'd been together. Of how crazy it would be to suspect the two people I trusted most. I convinced myself this was just a phase. And that belief was the last bit of peace I had before everything started to crack. By the time my gut stopped whispering and started screaming, I was already too deep to pull away without proof. Doubt had settled into my body like a constant low-grade fever, never enough to knock me out, but always there, making everything feel wrong. It started with time. She was suddenly busy in ways she never used to be. Late meeting. Last-minute plans. I just need space tonight. I didn't argue. I told myself healthy relationships allowed independence. But the hours added up, and the excuses started repeating like a script. My best friend mirrored her schedule without even realizing it. If she was out late, he was busy. If she said she was with coworkers, he was catching up with people. I remember joking once, "You two have the same social calendar now." They laughed too quickly. One night, she came home close to midnight. Her hair smelled different, not shampoo, not perfume. Something sharper. Colder. She dropped her keys on the counter, avoiding my eyes. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah. Why wouldn't it be?" she snapped, kicking off her shoes. That tone was new. Defensive. Like she was already arguing with me in her head. A few days later, I needed her laptop to print something. Mine had died, and hers was already open on the table. As I reached for it, she rushed over, hand outstretched. "I've got it," she said quickly. Too quickly. I froze. "It's just the printer." "I know. I'll do it." In that moment, something in me shifted. My chest tightened. This wasn't about privacy. This was about fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed everything I'd ignored, the way they looked at each other, the way conversation stopped when I entered the room, how she'd smile at her phone and then go cold with me. I remembered every time I'd been told I was overthinking, every time I'd swallowed doubt to keep the peace. Around 3 a.m., I got up and walked into the living room. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the fridge. I stood there, staring at the couch where they'd sat so close, laughing like I wasn't even there. For the first time, I didn't push the thought away. What if I'm not crazy? That question hit harder than any accusation. Because if the answer was yes, if my instincts were right, then the life I was planning, the future I was saving for, the trust I'd given so freely, none of it was real. And once that thought took root, I couldn't unfeel it. The next step scared me. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. After that night, something broke inside me. Not loudly. Not dramatically. It was quieter than that, like a switch flipping from believing to observing. I stopped reassuring myself. I stopped filling in the gaps with excuses. I started paying attention. I noticed how she'd angle her phone away from me now, even when we sat on opposite ends of the couch. How she'd step into the bathroom to answer calls she used to take right in front of me. I noticed how my best friend no longer looked me in the eye for more than a second at a time, how his jokes felt forced when I was around, like he was overcompensating. One evening, I mentioned his name casually. "Hey, I ran into him today," I said, watching her reflection in the kitchen window. Her shoulders tensed. Just slightly. Barely noticeable. "Oh," she replied. "How is he?" That question hit me wrong. Too careful. Too neutral. "Fine," I said. "Busy." She nodded, exhaled, and went back to what she was doing like she'd just passed some invisible test. That night, I lay awake listening to her breathe, counting the seconds between each inhale. My chest felt heavy, like I was carrying a secret I didn't want to know. I hated this version of myself, the one who watched instead of trusted, who analyzed tone and timing like evidence in a trial. I'd always prided myself on being secure, calm, rational. Now I felt small, suspicious, ashamed for even thinking this way. A few days later, my best friend came over. The energy in the room was off. They avoided sitting near each other, overcorrecting in a way that screamed awareness. When I left to grab drinks from the kitchen, I paused in the hallway. I heard her laugh. Soft. Familiar. The kind she used to save just for me. Then his voice, lowered, intimate. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard the tone. And that tone did something to me. It cracked open a fear I'd been holding back with both hands. When I walked back in, they jumped apart like kids caught doing something wrong. "You good?" he asked, smiling too wide. "Yeah," I said automatically. But my hands were shaking. That was the moment I realized I wasn't imagining things anymore. The puzzle pieces were there. I just hadn't wanted to assemble them. And once you see the outline of the truth, it becomes impossible to unsee. I went to bed that night knowing one thing for sure. Soon, I was going to have to look directly at what I'd been avoiding. I didn't confront either of them. Not yet. Confrontation felt like lighting a match in a room I wasn't ready to watch burn. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started quietly looking for answers. It felt disgusting at first. Like I was betraying my own values. I'd always believed that if you had to snoop, the relationship was already dead. But the doubt was eating me alive. I needed clarity, even if it destroyed me. I started small. Patterns. Timing. When she said she was working late, I checked the calendar. Her office had been closed that night. When my best friend said he was out of town, I saw his car parked 3 blocks away. Every coincidence felt like a pin pushed into my chest. One evening, she left her Apple Watch on the nightstand when she showered. It buzzed once. Then again. I stared at it like it might explode. I told myself not to touch it. I told myself this wasn't who I was. Then it buzzed again. I glanced down. A message preview lit up the screen. "I still feel you on me." My vision tunneled. My ears rang. I didn't even register whose name was attached at first. I didn't want to. My body knew before my brain caught up. It was him. My best friend. I dropped the watch like it burned. My hands were shaking so badly I had to sit down on the bed. The shower was still running. Water pounding against tile. Normal sounds from a life that suddenly felt fake. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, she smiled like everything was fine. "You okay?" she asked, noticing my face. "Yeah," I said, forcing the word out. It tasted like metal. "Just tired." She nodded, completely unaware, or pretending to be, and went to get dressed. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed that message over and over in my head, each word carving something out of me. "Still feel you on me." There was no misunderstanding that. No innocent explanation. No context where that was okay. The worst part wasn't even the cheating. It was realizing that while I was saving, planning, building a future, they were living one behind my back. Together. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, knowing the truth now, but also knowing this wasn't the whole story. And somehow, that made it even worse. Because if this was just the surface, I was terrified of what I'd uncover next. The next morning felt unreal, like I was walking through my own life wearing someone else's skin. She moved around the apartment humming softly, completely normal, completely comfortable. I watched her pour coffee, check her phone, kiss my cheek like nothing had happened. That casual intimacy hurt more than the message itself. I didn't confront her right away. I needed to hear it. From her mouth. I needed to know how deep this went. That evening, I asked her to sit with me on the couch. My voice sounded steady, which scared me more than if it had cracked. "Can I ask you something?" I said. She looked up, guarded but calm. "Okay. How long have you and him been close?" There it was. Not an accusation. Not yet. Just enough rope. Her face changed instantly. The color drained. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "What do you mean?" she asked. I swallowed. I saw the message. Silence filled the room. Thick. Heavy. She stared at the floor like it might save her. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that," she whispered. That sentence hit harder than any confession. Not "it didn't happen." Not "you're wrong." Just regret over timing. "How long?" I asked again, quieter now. She started crying. Real tears. Shaking shoulders. And somehow, that made me angrier. "It just happened," she said. "I didn't plan it." I laughed once. Sharp and ugly. "That's not an answer." She wiped her face and finally looked at me. "A year. A year." I felt something inside me go completely numb. She rushed to explain how it started emotionally, how she felt confused, how he understood her in ways I didn't anymore. She said she never meant to hurt me. Said she still loved me. Said it didn't change what we had. Then she said the thing that broke whatever was left of me. "He told me you'd understand eventually." I stood up so fast the coffee table rattled. My best friend. Feeding her lines. Justifying it. Framing me as the reasonable one who'd accept betrayal quietly. I realized then this wasn't just an affair. This was a collaboration. I went to bed that night without saying another word. She cried. She begged. She promised everything would stop. But as I lay there, staring into the dark, one thought kept repeating in my head. If this had been happening for a year, what else had they taken from me without me knowing? After that night, something inside me collapsed completely. Not in a dramatic, screaming way. There was no smashing of phones or throwing of clothes out the door. Rock bottom, for me, was quiet. Empty. Heavy. I still went to work. Still answered emails. Still nodded when people talked to me. But everything felt distant, like I was watching my life through thick glass. I stopped eating without noticing. Food tasted like nothing. Sleep came in short, shallow bursts filled with the same looping images, her phone lighting up, his name, that message burned into my brain. She tried to fix things. Or at least perform the version of fixing that didn't cost her much. She cried at night, promised transparency, offered her phone without me asking. It all felt too late. Like handing me a fire extinguisher after the house had already burned down. My best friend texted me. "We need to talk." I stared at the message for an hour before replying. There's nothing to talk about. He showed up anyway. Seeing him in person was worse than I imagined. He looked relieved. Like the secret being out had lifted a weight off him. That realization made my stomach turn. "I never meant for this to hurt you," he said, sitting across from me like this was a normal conversation. I laughed again. That same hollow laugh. "Then why didn't you stop?" He hesitated. "She said you were distant. That you didn't see her anymore." I felt the anger finally crack through the numbness. "So you decided to take my place?" "She needed someone," he replied quietly. I stood up, my hands shaking. "I needed a best friend. He didn't answer that. After he left, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch and slid down until I couldn't hold myself up anymore. The apartment felt smaller than it ever had. Like the walls were closing in. I thought about all the years I'd invested. All the loyalty I'd given without question. I felt stupid. Replaceable. Disposable. That night, I stared at the engagement ring on the table. The symbol of a future that no longer existed. For the first time in my life, I didn't know who I was without the roles I'd built: partner, planner, provider, loyal friend. And that emptiness scared me more than the betrayal itself. Because when everything you thought defined you is gone, you're left alone with the question of what comes next. I didn't leave right away. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story later. They ask why I stayed, why I didn't explode, why I didn't kick her out or walk out myself. The truth is, I was emotionally paralyzed. When something that big collapses, your body doesn't sprint, it freezes. For days, we lived in the same space like strangers sharing a waiting room. She slept on the edge of the bed. I slept facing the wall. Conversations were practical and hollow. Do you need groceries? I'll be late tonight. I'll take the trash out. No apologies anymore. No explanations. Just avoidance. She kept waiting for me to do something. To yell. To forgive. To fight. I could feel it in the way she watched me, like she was bracing for impact that never came. And somehow, that silence seemed to scare her more than anger would have. One night, she finally asked, "What are you thinking?" I stared at the floor for a long time before answering. "I'm thinking about how long you looked me in the eye and lied." Her face crumpled. "I didn't want to lose you." "You already did," I said quietly. That was the moment I realized something unsettling. She wasn't afraid of hurting me. She was afraid of losing the life I provided, the stability, the future, the version of me that made her feel secure while she lived another reality behind my back. I started packing the next day. Slowly. Methodically. Each item I folded felt like I was dismantling a version of myself I'd outgrown without realizing it. She hovered nearby, offering help I didn't want. "Where will you go?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. And I meant it. When I finally picked up the engagement ring, my hand trembled. I placed it on the counter between us. She stared at it like it was a verdict. "You don't have to decide this now," she whispered. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without love blurring my vision. "I decided a year ago," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." I walked out without a dramatic goodbye. No slammed door. No final speech. Just silence. And as I stood in the hallway, hand on the doorknob, a terrifying thought hit me. Walking away was only the beginning. I still had to figure out who I was without the people who'd defined my life. And I had no idea how painful that process was about to be. I thought leaving would hurt the most. I was wrong. The real pain came afterward, when there was no one left to perform for and no crisis left to manage. Just silence. Long, echoing silence. I crashed on a friend's couch at first. Someone who knew of my best friend, but not with him. I couldn't bring myself to explain everything. Saying it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. So I just said, "Things ended," and let the rest hang in the air. At night, the loneliness crept in slow and cruel. My phone stayed quiet. No goodnight texts. No inside jokes. No one asking if I made it home safe. I stared at the ceiling, replaying memories I didn't want anymore, laughing on the couch, planning trips, believing in things that had already been rewritten without me. The worst part was the doubt. Not about them, but about myself. I questioned every instinct I'd ever trusted. Every time I'd been called secure, mature, steady. I wondered if those traits had just made me easier to deceive. I ran into my ex-fiancée's mother at the grocery store one afternoon. She smiled like nothing had changed. "We miss you," she said. "She's been having such a hard time." I nodded politely, my chest tightening. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I just walked away with my hands shaking, realizing how easy it was for the narrative to shift when you weren't there to protect it. My best friend tried calling again. Then texting. Then leaving voicemails. "I hate how this ended. I never meant to lose you." I deleted them without listening. Still, some nights, I stared at my phone wanting answers I knew wouldn't help. I wanted to know if they were together openly now. If they felt guilty. If they ever talked about me like I was a person instead of collateral damage. I started therapy because I didn't trust my own thoughts anymore. Because my chest felt tight all the time. Because I woke up already exhausted. The therapist asked me once, "What hurts the most?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, that I was loyal in a world where loyalty wasn't valued. Saying it out loud broke something open. I realized then that I wasn't just grieving a relationship. I was grieving the version of myself who believed love was safe. And that realization scared me. Because if love wasn't safe, what was I supposed to build next? Something shifted a few months after I left. Not suddenly. Not cleanly. It wasn't some motivational montage moment where I woke up healed and hopeful. It was quieter than that, like realizing one day that the constant ache in your chest isn't as sharp as it used to be. Therapy helped. Not because it fixed me, but because it gave language to the damage. I stopped asking what's wrong with me and started asking why did I tolerate so little for myself. That distinction mattered more than I expected. I moved into a small apartment by myself. Bare walls. Cheap furniture. Silence that was mine this time, not forced on me. I cooked meals I actually ate. I slept without bracing for emotional whiplash. For the first time in years, my nervous system wasn't on edge. Then the truth started reaching me without my asking. Mutual friends let things slip. Apparently, once I was gone, things between them weren't so perfect. The secrecy that bonded them turned into suspicion. He started worrying she'd cheat on him the way she cheated with him. She started resenting that he wasn't as stable as I had been. That irony didn't bring me joy. But it brought clarity. One night, I ran into my best friend, former best friend, outside a bar. He looked thinner. Tired. Nervous. "I messed up," he said immediately. I studied his face and felt nothing. No rage. No urge to defend myself. Just distance. "I know," I replied. "She's not who I thought she was," he added, desperate. I almost laughed. Almost. "You knew exactly who she was," I said calmly. "You just thought you'd be the exception." He didn't have an answer for that. Walking away from him felt different than walking away from her. Lighter. Like closing a door that should have been shut a long time ago. I realized something important that night: their betrayal didn't ruin me. It revealed me. It stripped away roles I'd outgrown and forced me to build boundaries I should have had all along. I wasn't broken. I was recalibrated. And as I walked back to my apartment under the streetlights, hands in my pockets, breathing steady, I understood something that would have terrified the old version of me. I didn't need them to validate my worth anymore. And that meant the story wasn't over yet. I never got an apology that felt real. Not the kind people imagine when they talk about closure. There was no heartfelt confession, no moment where either of them fully owned the damage they caused. And for a while, that bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I'd rehearse imaginary conversations in my head, what I'd say if I ever got the chance, how I'd finally make them understand the weight of what they did. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted them to sit with the consequences the way I had been forced to. But life doesn't always give you that. What it did give me was distance. And with distance came a kind of clarity that confrontation never could. I stopped checking their social media. Blocked numbers I'd memorized without realizing it. Mutual friends learned not to bring them up around me. Not because I asked, but because my indifference made the topic fall flat. There was no reaction to feed off of anymore. One night, months later, I found an old notebook while unpacking. Inside were pages of plans I'd written years ago, wedding ideas, savings goals, timelines for a future that never happened. I expected it to hurt. Instead, I felt a strange gratitude. That future would have required me to keep shrinking. To keep explaining myself. To keep being the reliable one while others took liberties with my trust. I tore those pages out slowly. One by one. Not in anger. In acceptance. I realized something then that I wish I'd known earlier: closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you decide you no longer need permission for. They didn't get to define the ending of my story just because they hijacked the middle. I started dating again, not seriously, not desperately. Just honestly. With boundaries. With questions I used to be afraid to ask. And when something felt off, I didn't rationalize it away. I listened. The version of me who ignored red flags would have called that overthinking. Now I call it self-respect. I don't hate them. I don't wish them harm. I don't need revenge. The life I'm building now wouldn't have been possible if they'd stayed in it. And that realization, that my best years weren't stolen, just delayed, hit harder than any apology ever could. There was only one part left I hadn't fully accepted yet. What it meant to finally trust myself again. The last thing to come back wasn't trust in other people. It was trust in myself. For a long time, I thought rebuilding meant proving I could love again the same way I used to, fully, endlessly, without hesitation. But that version of love had come from a place of self-abandonment. From believing my value was in how much I could endure. That's not love. That's survival disguised as loyalty. One night, almost a year after everything ended, I caught myself laughing, really laughing, over something stupid with someone new. Nothing serious. No promises. Just comfort. And when the moment passed, I didn't panic. I didn't wonder if it meant more than it did. I didn't feel the urge to overgive to secure my place. I just let it be. That's when it hit me: I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of being replaced. Not of being too much or not enough. I'd already survived the worst version of betrayal, the kind that comes from the people who know you best. And I didn't collapse. I didn't become bitter or cruel. I didn't lose my ability to care. I just learned where to place it. Every so often, I hear updates about them. How they didn't last. How trust issues poisoned what they tried to build. How they both carry this unspoken tension around the story of me. I don't engage. I don't correct the narrative. I don't need to. The justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with an audience or a dramatic confrontation. It came quietly, in peace, in self-respect, in a life that no longer required me to betray myself to keep others comfortable. I still believe in loyalty. I still believe in long-term planning. I just no longer offer them to people who haven't earned access to that level of commitment. If I could speak to the version of myself from the beginning of this story, I wouldn't warn him about them. I'd tell him this. Pay attention to how you feel when you're around someone. And never confuse familiarity with safety. Some betrayals don't ruin you. They refine you. And the life I'm building now, the one grounded in boundaries, honesty, and self-trust, is stronger than anything I ever planned back then. That's the ending they'll never get to touch. And I'm finally okay with that.